Good evening, everybody. Just let me know if you all are hearing me clearly, please. Also, just please type your names in the chat so I'll know who's here. All right, we're gonna start there now. So I gave you all a quiz to complete, right? Which was quadratic functions, right? Some of you all did pretty well. Some of you all had some problems, right? So what I'm gonna do, I'm going to go through those questions to make sure you understand how we got the answers for these things, right? So starting with the first question, right? Now, because the quiz usually it randomizes the question, so these questions may not necessarily correspond to the numbers that you have, right? So what does that mean? So for example, this is one of the first questions on the paper, right? So the question says the graph shows the function 2x squared minus x minus 3, right? Using the graph, state the values of x for which f of x is equal to 0, right? Now, when you get a question like this, right, let me see if I can give you what the answers look like. Let's see if you can. All right, so these are the possible answers, right? Can somebody tell me what is the answer for this question? Or what do they think is the answer for this question? Alright, so we have quadratic, it's 2x squared minus x minus 3, and they want to know what is the, or state the values of x for which this, f of x equal to 0. You all need to understand what that means. What is f of x being equal to 0? What does that mean, right? So Sharice is saying B. Now, when they ask you for f of x equal to 0, right, you need to understand what that means. That means, where does the graph cut my x-axis? So that really means, where does the graph cut the x-axis, right? That is what this question is asking me. So you need to know where your x-axis is. This here, this line here, this line here, this is my x-axis. This is my x-axis, and it's also called the line y equal to 0, right? So to solve this question here, all we need to do, we need to know what this value is here, and we need to know what this value is here, right? Just by looking at the graph. So what that means is that x has to be equal to -1 and x has to be equal to 1.5, right? Or 1.5, because this point here is midway between 1 and 2, right? So I have two solutions, right? So whenever you see a question where they ask you where f of x is equal to 0, right? In this case here, all we're doing is finding where does the graph cut my x-axis, right? So the answer in this case here is -1 and 1.5. So the answer is B, right? So Sharice, yes, that is correct. That's the answer, right? Now I'm going through this because these are the typical questions that you get in the real exam, right? So I need to make sure you all understand how to do these questions, right? So that was the first question. The next question, right? I believe some of you all got this wrong. All right, so we have this. Let's see what the answers were. All right, so first thing we need to do, we need to understand what the question is asking, right? So state the values of x for which f of x equal to 4, right? So I saw some of you all had some problems with this. Now, so before I tell you what the answer is supposed to be, what do you all think is the answer? All right, so I see Danica saying B. All right, so Danica is saying B, right? But B cannot be correct because the question is not asking me where f of x is equal to 0, you know. If it was asking me f of x equal to 0, then obviously this is going to be one solution, this point here, and this point is going to be a solution, right? But that's not what the question is asking. The question is asking, find the values of x for which f of x is equal to 0. Now, f of x equal to 0 is where it cuts the x-axis, right? That's what this means. F of x equal to 0, that's where it cuts the x-axis. But if you have f of x equal to some number, right? So let's call it some number, right? So 5, 6, whatever. It's a number, right? What you are trying to find here is where, so this is what this means. Where does the graph of f of x cut the line y equal to k? That is what that means, right? So when we have f of x equal to a number, the graph is asking you, or the question is asking you, where does this graph of f of x cut the line y equal to k? That's what it's asking me. So we know that when you draw a line y equal to k, right? Remember, I went through this with you all. The line y equal to k is a horizontal line. So y equal to k is going to look like this, right? So try to understand what the question is asking. So the question is saying, in this question here, f of x is equal to 4. So what you need to do, you need to draw the line y equal to 4. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to come here and you're going to draw a line. This line I'm drawing here. And this line here is going to be y equal to 4, right? So my answer to this question here, find the values of x for which f of x equal to 0. That is, make sure you understand what it's saying. This is where does this the curve cut the line y equal to 4. It cuts it at this point here, which corresponds to -1, and it cuts at this point here, which corresponds to 2. So the answers are x equal -1 and x is equal to 2. So the answer in this case here is this, right? So the answer is -1 and 2. So the answer is D. Now, I want you all to remember something. Now, even though you're all saying you put C and all of that, right? When you get the questions, what happens is that the system, apart from randomizing the questions, you all don't get the questions in the same order. Even the answers are changed as well. So your answer for A might be different to somebody else's, right? So in this case here, right now I'm doing the quiz, so it's saying D, right? But what I'm concerned about is this. X equal -1 and x equal 2. I want to make sure you all understand this, right? Alright, cool. Alright, so hopefully when we get the others, you all should be able to make some sense out of it. Let me just create some. Alright, so let me see what is the next question as I do it here. Alright, so in this particular one here, we have a graph, and the graph is showing a function f of x. They want us to state the coordinates of the maximum point for this function. Now, if I didn't mention this in class before, when they ask you for a minimum point or a maximum point, another word that they can use is something called a turning point, right? So another word for a maximum or a minimum point is called a turning point, right? Those of you who are doing advanced, you're going to encounter turning points, right? So a turning point is simply a point at which the gradient changes. That's all, right? So they want to know the coordinates of the minimum point. I think most of you all got this question, right? So what do you all think is the answer for this one? Alright, so Danica is saying C. So all you're doing here, they want a minimum point. My minimum point is actually this point here, right? So the coordinates of this point here, we need to read off the x value and we need to read off the y value. So therefore this point here is actually 3 minus 2, right? So the answer in this case here will be C, right? So yes, so Josiah and Danica, that's correct. Okay, next one. Alright, so in this one here, we're talking about a maximum point, right? They want to know what is the coordinates, what are the coordinates of the maximum point, right? So these are my answers here. Alright, so we have a function f of x equal to 3 minus 4x minus x squared. They want us to state the maximum point for this function. Again, just remember, another word for a maximum point is also called a turning point. Right? That's another way they can ask the question in the exam. So it's called a turning point. So they want to know what are the coordinates of the maximum point, right? So what is the answer for this one? Alright, I've seen Josiah saying minus 2 and 7. Alright. Now, you're talking about a maximum point. So this point here, so I want you all to be able to recognize what a maximum point is, right? That's my maximum point here. This is the x coordinate of my maximum point, and this is the y coordinate of my maximum point. So therefore, this point here is minus 2, 7, right? So therefore, the answer is, in this case here, it is B, right? So this is the coordinates of the maximum point for that function, right? Cool. So that's number 5. Now let me see if some of you all were paying attention to what I said a few minutes ago, right? So we have this graph here. Alright, so we have this here. So we have, which is the same graph that we had before, f of x equals 3 minus 4x minus x squared. They want us to state the values of x for which f of x is equal to 6, right? I just gave an explanation as to how we do a question like this. Alright, so what do you all think is the answer for this one, based on the explanation I gave a little while ago? Alright, so I seen Danica saying B. All right, so I've seen Danica, Emily, and Bianca, she's all saying B, right? So based on the explanation I gave you all just now, when we have to solve something like this, where f of x is equal to 6, right? What that is asking us is, where does a graph cut the line y equal to 6? So in order to work this question, the first thing we need to do is to draw the line y equal to 6, which, as I explained previously, it's a horizontal line. So this here is a line y equal to 6. So this here is y equal to 6. So therefore, where does the graph cut that line? It cuts at this point here, right, which is minus 3. And it also cuts at this point here, which is minus 1. So therefore, the answers we're looking for are x equal minus 3 and x is equal to minus 1. So these are my two solutions, right, to the question f of x equal to 6, right? So in this particular case here, the answer has to be, which one is it? Yeah, so the answer is B, right? So the answer is B for this one. All right, let's move on to the next question. All right, so in some of these questions, when I set the quiz, what I did, I used the same graph for a lot of them, right? Because when you have one quadratic graph, you can ask several different questions about the graph, right? So let's see. Right, so look at this question here. The graph shows the function, so this is my function here. Use the graph to determine the value of f of 0, right? What do you all think is the answer for this one? So the question wants you to determine the value of f of 0. Come on, you all should know this. Anybody? Remember, you have the function f of x is equal to 3 minus 4x minus x squared, right? And they want us to determine the value of f of 0, right? That's what the question wants, you know. What is f of 0? But they want us to use a graph to do that, right? So Cherie's saying she thinks it's B. How did she get B? No, B is not the answer. What about Danica, Emily, and Chad, and Josiah? So like I said, I saw some of you all get some trouble doing this particular quiz for me, eh? Alright, Teresa is saying A. She changed her mind. Let's see. Alright, so there are two ways you can work this question, right? But I want you to work the question using the graph. If you want to get f of 0, right, all you have to do is to substitute 0 when x. So what this means is when x equals 0. That's what this means. When x equals 0. That's what that means, right? So you need to understand the mathematical language here, right? So when x equals 0, this is my x-axis here. My x-axis is this here. So when x equals 0, this is x equals 0 here. I am going to go up and see where it meets the graph. It meets the graph at this point here. So the answer is actually just 3, right? So when they give you a graph and they ask you to find f of 0, all we're going to do is to substitute, or we just looking and see where the point x equals to 0 meets the graph. That's essentially what you're doing, right? If in an exam you didn't have the graph, right, and they gave you the function as being this, and you want to find f of 0, all you would have done is substituted 0 into this equation. So it's, you're going to put a 0 here because x is 0, minus 0 squared. So this becomes 3 minus 4 by 0 is 0, minus 0 squared is 0. So therefore f of 0 is 3. So this here is by calculation, we can get that answer, but I want you to use a graph to work this out. Alright? So the answer is A for this particular one. Okay? So let's look at, so that was question 6, right? So question 7, we have the same graph again, all right? So we have this graph here and we want to know what is the equation of the axis of symmetry. So what is the answer for this one? So Sharice and Danica, they're saying C. Emily is also saying C. Now remember, your axis of symmetry is that vertical line that divides your graph into two equal parts. So if you had something like this, right? Let's join any graph. Alright, if I had a graph like this, remember a quadratic curve, right? It's symmetrical about this line here. This line here, x equal to some number, right? So this here is what we call our axis of symmetry, right? So this is my axis of symmetry, right? So if I fold my, let's say I were to draw this graph on graph paper and I fold the graph along that line, the graph is going to, so this part of the graph here and this part of the graph here is going to line up exactly, right? So that's like my mirror line, okay? So essentially, if they want us to state the equation for the axis of symmetry, the axis of symmetry is this line here, this line, all right? And all we're concerned about is this number here. So the axis of symmetry is always written as x equal to something. It's x equal to something, right? That something in this case here we know is minus 2 because I can see that from the graph. So therefore the answer is x equal to minus 2. Notice I gave you some answers here that they were really distractors. So some students might actually put y equal minus 2. But my axis of symmetry is always written as x is equal to something. So the answer is C, right? So let's see what's the next one. Trying to remember if anybody got this correct. All right, so what do we have here? So we have two functions. We have f of x is one function. We have g of x is the next function, right? So if you look at the graph, f of x is the quadratic curve and g of x is the straight line, right? I've also given you all the formula for the curve as well as the straight line. So the question wants us to find out f of x, what are the values of x for which f of x is equal to x plus 7. Now, using the same concept that I explained earlier, what do you all think is the answer for this one? Alright, so Danica is saying A, Tamika is also saying A. Let me see. So, first thing you need to understand what the question is really asking. Now, f of x is the quadratic, right? So the question is asking, where does the quadratic, so understand what the question is asking. Where does the quadratic cut the line, right? Y equal to x plus 7, right? You need to understand the language. This is what it's asking us. Where does the graph, the quadratic graph, cut the line? That's all it's asking. So if you look at the diagram, it cuts at this point here, and it cuts at this point here, right? So these values correspond to minus 4, and it also corresponds to minus 1. So the answer has to be x equal minus 4 and x equal minus 1, right? So therefore, the answer in this case here is E. All right? So next one. Alright, so for this particular one, the diagram shows a graph y equal x squared minus 6x plus 8, right? And I want you to use a graph to solve this equation, right? So x squared minus 6x plus 8 is equal to 0. What is the answer for this one? All right, seeing some A's coming in here. So this is another way they can ask a question like this. Bear in mind that it can also come like this. What are the roots? The roots, right, of the equation x squared minus 6x plus 8 equal to 0, right? This is another way you can answer the question. So what they're trying to do here, really trying to ask, where does the graph cut my x-axis? That's all they're doing here. So in this case here, it cuts at this point here, which is 2, and it cuts at 4, right? Because remember, this here is my x-axis. So it's cutting at x equal 2. So the answers are x equal 2 and x is equal to 4, right? So in this case here, the answer is actually E. So you all are correct. Let's see. The next question. Alright, so we have a next question here. We have, it's the same diagram as before, but I want you to state the minimum point of this graph. So what is the minimum point of this graph? Alright, so I've seen a lot of people saying B. Alright, that's a good sign. Alright, so they want the minimum point, right? Also, before I say what the answer is, what is another word for a minimum point, right? If you all are paying attention to what I was saying before, what is another word for a minimum point? All right, good. So you all are paying attention. It's called a turning point, right? So in the exam, either the multiple choice or even the paper 2, they can ask you that. What are the coordinates of the turning point, right? Okay, cool. So, all right. So what did you all say for the answer? All right. So most of you all are saying B, right? So the minimum point in this case here is this point here, right? This is my minimum point. This is my X value and this is my Y value. So the coordinates of this point here will be 3 minus 1, right? So the answer is B. All right. So let's look at this next question here, right? Right, so we have this. We have the diagram shows y equal x squared minus 6x plus 8, right? Obviously that's the quadratic. We also have the graph y equal x minus 2, which is a straight line. And I want you, using the graphs, to solve this equation here. So this is my equation I'm trying to solve, right? So you're solving x squared minus 6x plus 8 is equal to x minus 2, right? So you're going to use a graphical method to solve this equation, okay? So what do you all think is the answer for this one? All right, so I've seen Danica saying D. All right, anybody else? All right, so I've seen some answers coming in. So this is a graphical way or graphical method of solving this equation, right? This is the equation you're trying to solve here. Now look at what's happening here. This here on the left hand side, this is my quadratic, right? So this is my quadratic graph. So this is my quadratic function, right? And on the right hand side we have my straight line, right? So this is my straight line. Now, what the question is really asking for us to do is, where does the quadratic function and where does the straight line intersect, right? So if we look at the graph, we see that it intersects at this point here, which is x equal 2, and it also intersects at this point here, which corresponds to x equal 5, right? So therefore the answers should be x equal 2 and x equal to 5, right? Sometimes they bring a question like this in your paper 2, right? So the answer will be 2 and 5, which corresponds to D. All right. Now, I want you all to remember, right? The students who do well in my class are the ones who practice the questions that I give them to do, right? So, and I'm not too concerned about you getting the questions wrong. I want you to be exposed to the questions and to understand what they can ask in the exam. So you're not confused or you're not scared when you see the questions in the exam, right? We've gone through all this material in class already. So what we're really doing here is just revising, right? Let's see. So that was, let me get the next question. Alright, so we have this one here. We have a quadratic, and we want to know the values of x for which f of x equals 0. Alright, so what's the answer for this one? So we have a function which is x squared plus x minus 6. That's this function here. And I want you to state the values of x for which f of x equal to 0. I already explained what this means, right? So what's the answer for this one? Alright, so I see people saying D. So remember, once you see f of x equal to 0, what that means is that where does the graph cut my x-axis? That's what this is saying. So where does it cut the x-axis, right? So where does the graph cut the x-axis? All right, so my x-axis is this line here. This is my x-axis here, right? This is my x-axis. So it's cutting at this point here, which corresponds to -3, and it's cutting at this point here, which corresponds to -2. So therefore x equal -3 and x equal 2. So these are the answers we're looking for. So that's D. All right, so yep, you all are correct. The answer is D. Let's see. So we have the next question here. I've given you a table, right? And it's a typical question in the paper 2, right? So we have a table here, and you want to draw the graph y equal 3x plus 2x minus x squared using this table. What is the missing value? So they want to know the missing value in the table. So they want to know what comes here, right? So what is the missing value in this table here? What is the answer for this one? Alright, so I've given you all a minute to work this out. This should be straightforward. You know what y is. Y is equal to 3 plus 2x minus x squared. Alright, and they want you to figure out what is the missing value that needs to go in this table here. Alright, so I need an answer before I work it out. Alright, so I'm seeing some E's. Alright, so if you were given a question like this in the exam and you had to plot a graph, right, you need some corresponding values of x and y in order to plot the graph, right? So all you need to do is to substitute. So you're going to say when x equal minus 2, right? Because this is the value we're talking about here. When x equal minus 2, y is equal to, and you're going to all you're going to do is substitute. So you're going to put 3 plus 2 multiplied by minus 3 minus, and you're going to put minus 2 squared, right? All we're doing is substituting here. So this is 3 plus 2 multiplied by minus 3 gives me minus 6 minus 2 squared gives me plus 4, right? So this is 3 minus 6, which is minus 3 minus 4. One second, I got all the answer. So 3 plus 2. So I am getting minus 7. Is that correct? Right? Anybody else get minus 7? Oh wait, sorry, I made a mistake. Yes, this is minus 2. Yeah, this is minus 2. So this here should be minus 4. Right? So yeah, that's my bad. So the answer is minus 5. Alright, so the answer is E. Yeah, I saw the mistake. Yeah, I wrote the wrong thing in the brackets, right? So the answer is minus 5. So that's question 13. What do we want here now? Alright, so we have our next question here, right? Alright, so in this particular one here, the question is asking, state the values of x for which f of x equal to 0. Well, we've done enough questions here to know what the answer for this is. So what is the answer for this question? Alright, so I see Shuri saying D. So remember what this means, right? When f of x equal to 0, where does the graph cut the x-axis, right? So it cuts the x-axis at this point here, which corresponds to 2, and it cuts this point here, which corresponds to 3. So yes, the answer is D, alright? So the questions should start getting much easier now as we move on, alright? So these types of questions, these give people some trouble. So let me see what you all will say for these, right? All right, so we have a quadratic function here drawn, right? And they want us to find out f of x, what are the values of x for which f of x is less than 0, right? So less than 0, what do you think is the answer for this one? Right, so this is one of those questions that give people some trouble. First thing you need to do, you need to understand what the question is asking. All right. So I see Sharice telling me B. All right. Let me hear what else other people are saying. Anybody else besides Sharice? Now, in order to do these questions, you need to understand the language we use, right? So here's what's going on here. When you see they ask you for the range of values of x for which f of x is less than 0, right? You need to understand what this means. What this is really asking us here is which part of the graph is below my x-axis. That's what the question is asking. Which part of the graph is below my x-axis, right? So let me use a different color here. So my x-axis is this line here. This line here, this line is my x-axis, right? That's my x-axis. Now, if I look carefully, what part of the graph is below my x-axis? You see here, look, this piece here that I'm shading in green, this little piece here is below my x-axis, right? But that only occurs from this point here to this point here, right? So this is 2 and this is 3. So between 2 and 3, my graph here is below my x-axis, right? Now, the next part is you need to be able to write that as an inequality, right? So what you do, you say x has to be greater than 2 but less than 3, right? That's how you write the inequality for less than. So therefore the answer has to be B, right? The answer has to be B in this particular case. Does that make sense to you all? Right. So the next question now, this one here, let's see. Right, so this is a similar type question again. Let me get the answers. All right, so in this case you need to understand the language again. So f of x is greater than 0. So if less than meant below the x-axis, this here means above the x-axis. Right? Just give me 1 sec here. All right, so what's the answer for this one? Yes, Daryl, multiple choice practice test 8 is up already. All right, so what is the answer for this one? Alright, so I see somebody saying B. Let me see what's going on here. Sharice is also saying B. Alright, so first thing we need to try to figure out. So which part of the graph is above the x-axis? So look, this part here, this whole part in green. So anything going this way is above the x-axis, right? So that corresponds to x greater than 3, right? This part here, all here, is above the x-axis. All this part here is above the x-axis. So therefore, this here is corresponding to x less than 2, right? So what we're saying is that anything above 3 and anything less than 2 is our answer, right? So this is how you have to write the inequality when it's above the x-axis, right? The inequalities are separated as compared to the one we just did, right? So we're looking for x greater than 3, x less than 2, right? So therefore the answer has to be E. Everybody getting B, so yes, no. Yeah, so the answer is not B, right? What you do for when it's greater than, we have to separate the inequalities. So you write it as two separate inequalities. One is x is greater than 3 and one is x is less than 2. So the answer is A and not B. All right, so that's how we do that one. Let's see, so what number was that? That was number 16. All right, this one is an easy one again. What do we want here? Steady values of x for which f of x equal to 0. All right, what's the answer for this one? This one is pretty straightforward, right? We've done a few like these already. All right, Asin Shri is saying E. All right, so I've seen a few E's coming up here, right? So all I'm asking for is steady values of x for which f of x equal to 0. F of x equal to 0 is where does the graph cut my x-axis, right? So it cuts at -2 and 3. So yes, the answer is E for this one, all right? So that's number 17. Almost finished with the people. All right, so you all getting an opportunity to try the inequality one again, right? Let me see if you all can get it correct this time. All right, so I want you to state the values of x for which f of x is less than 0. So think about it. The question is asking state the values of x for which f of x is less than or equal to 0. Remember what less than means, right? Less than means what part of your graph is below my x-axis. So think about it. So this means what part of my graph is below. Once you see the word less than, we're talking about below the x-axis. Right? So below the x-axis will correspond to this here, this part of the graph, and also this part of the graph, right? So which means that anything above this value here will be less than, and anything less than this value here will be less than. So therefore x has to be greater than 3 and x has to be less than -2, right? So this is how you're going to have to write it, as two separate inequalities, right? So in this case here, the answer has to be C. All right, so the answer is C, not B, but C. Alright, so before I move on, let me just make sure you all understand why it's C. Alright, so what you all need to remember, you need to first of all figure out what part of the graph, in this case, understand what this is accent first, right? Understand what that is accent first. Once you understand that, once you understand that, then you can work the problem. So what part of your graph is below the x-axis? So this piece here is below my x-axis. This piece here is also below my x-axis, which means that anything greater than 3 will be below my x-axis. Anything greater than -2 will also be below my x-axis, right? So that's why we get in C for the answer. Yep, that's what you need to do. Read it exactly like how I'm reading it, and you'll get the answer. So this is question 18. This is 19. Hopefully you'll get this one. So we have this one here, right? State the values of x for which f of x is greater than 0. So the answer for this one. Alright, so I'm seeing a C and an E. Anybody else? Say the values of x for which f of x is greater than 0. So what the question is asking is which part of the graph is above my x-axis. So when we say above, we're talking about this part here. All of this is above my x-axis. All right, all of this. All right, so we're looking at this point here and this point here. So any value of x that lies within this range between -2 and 3 will be above the x-axis. So we're looking at x has to be greater than -2 but less than 3. All right, so the answer in this case here is E. Alright, so the answer is E. Yes, Sharice, what you could do is review the video, right? So let me just give you the last question here. So this is the last question on this quiz that I gave you, right? All right, so I'll give you 2 minutes to work this out for me. All right, so I'm seeing everybody saying D. Let's see. All right, so what do we have here? The diagram shows, so we have two graphs. We have this and we have this, right? On the same axis, right? Using graphs to solve f of x equal x plus 2. So we did a question like this previously, right? So basically we're trying to find out which part of the graph, or where do the two graphs intersect. That's all we're looking for. So it's at -2 and this point here, which corresponds to 2, right? So it's 2 and -2. So the answer, yes, you all are correct. The answer is D. All right. So just a note, so the people who do well in my class are the ones who do the quizzes that I give them to do. Remember, everything that we cover in class, you should be able to answer some of these questions, right? Let's see. I need to, give me a sec, right? All right, so I don't believe I gave you all this quiz to do as yet, but we can start to work it now. Alright, so look at this question here, right? So we want to complete the square for the following quadratic, right? Now, what they will do in the exam, they typically, so x squared minus x minus 6, right? I want to write that in the form x plus h squared, right? Plus k, right? So the typical exam question will tell you to write the equation in this format. A open brackets x plus h squared plus k, and what we have to do is to figure out what a is. You need to figure out what h is and what k is, right? So last week and the week before we spent a significant amount of time looking at this, right? So let me just to get you started, right? The first thing we do, we expand the right hand side. So we say a, when I expand x plus h squared, we're gonna get x squared plus 2hx plus h squared plus k. So this becomes ah squared plus 2ahx plus ah squared plus k, right? And then the next step we do, we equate the coefficients. So x squared minus x minus 6. This is x squared minus x minus 6. So I kind of help you out already, right? So what I want you to do, I want you, if we complete the square for this, right, which one is the answer in this case here? I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this one. Alright, so I hope you're all working in the background here, waiting for somebody to give me an answer first before I work it out. Huh? Alright, so somebody got B. So if we equate the coefficients, right, this is how I taught you to do it in class. So we have x squared here and we have ax squared here. So if we compare coefficients, we can say that a is equal to 1, right? Then we look at the x terms. So we have minus x on the side here, but you have 2ahx on the side here. So therefore 2ah is equal to minus 1, right? But you already know that a is 1. So this is 2 by 1, h equal minus 1. So therefore 2h is equal to minus 1. So h is equal to minus a half, right? So you work out two of the things already. You worked out a, you worked out h. Next thing is to work out k. So what you're left with on the left hand side is minus 6, and you have all of this here, right? So we're going to say a h squared plus k is equal to minus 6. But you know what a is? A is 1. You also know what h is. H is minus a half. Plus k is equal to minus 6, right? Or this is squared, right? So when you work out this here, we end up with 1 over 4, because minus a half squared gives me a quarter, right? Plus k equal minus 6. So therefore k is equal to minus 6 minus a quarter, right? So minus 6 minus a quarter gives me minus 6 and a quarter, right? If you write that as an improper fraction, it will be 6 4 is 24 and 1. So this is minus 25 over 4, right? So therefore we can write this equation as, so x squared minus x minus 6. All right, you don't need to write the 1 because a is 1. So it's going to be x plus h. So it's x minus a half squared minus 25 over 4. All right. So therefore the answer is actually B in this particular case. Right? So this is B here. Alright, so I'm seeing somebody asking what paper am I doing. Well, this is from my e-learning site, right? So these are my questions that I use when I teach topics in class. Alright. Alright, so seeing that I kind of refresh your memory as to what we're doing here, right? I'm giving you a next question to work out. So what's the answer for this one? All right. So I'll give you 2 minutes to work that out for me. All right. Also, for those of you who are not in my class, on the YouTube channel, just click like and subscribe for me when you get a chance. All right. Just now, somebody saying it's blurry. Usually, if you're getting it blurry, it's because of your internet connection, right? Because I'm actually streaming in HD here. All right. What you could do is just refresh your page. Let's see. So Sharice is saying B. So the first thing you need to do, you need to say x squared plus 3x plus 2 is equal to a, open brackets, x plus h squared plus k, right? This is what we're going to do here. So by now you should know how to expand this. So this is a, and when you expand this, it will be x squared plus 2 hx plus h squared plus k. When you remove the brackets, we're going to end up with ax squared plus 2ahx plus ah squared plus k, right? And what you have here is x squared plus 3x plus 2. And you have x squared plus 3x plus 2. So now we're going to equate coefficients. If you equate coefficients, what we have is, all you have is x squared here, and you have ax squared here. So therefore, a is equal to 1, right? Then you have plus 3x here, but you have plus 2ahx. So therefore, 2ah is equal to 3. And we know a is 1, so 2 by 1 by h is equal to 3. So therefore, 2h equal 3. H is equal to 3 over 2, right? So you've found out h already. Then what you're left with is plus 2 here, but you have all of this here, ah squared plus k. So this is ah squared plus k is equal to 2. A is 1, so a is 1 and h is 3 over 2. And you're squaring this, plus k is equal to 2. So when you work out 3 over 2 squared, you will get 9 over 4 plus k is equal to 2. So therefore, k is equal to 2 minus 9 over 4. Alright? So 2 minus 9 over 4 gives me minus a quarter. So this gives me minus a quarter. So therefore, when we write it in this format here, it will be x plus 3 over 2 squared minus a quarter, right? So the answer in this case here will be, which one is that? Is going to be E, right? So the answer is E for this particular one. All right. Now, let's recap something else here. If I have a quadratic equation looking like this, y equal to x minus 4 squared minus 2, right? Let's say I have an equation and it's written in this format here, right? I have a question for you all, or questions for you all. So here are these questions, right? So question 1. What is the equation for the axis of symmetry? Next one, what are the coordinates of the minimum point? Right, and oh, wait, just now. All right, so let's look at this here. All right, so I've given you a quadratic. The quadratic is y equal x minus 4 in brackets squared minus 2, right? That's my quadratic. I want to know the first part. So part 1, what is the equation for the axis of symmetry? So what is the answer for part 1? So part 1, what is the equation for the axis of symmetry? Can anybody tell me that? Part 1. Alright, so I'm seeing some answers here. Some of you all saying -4. Some of you all forgetting what we're supposed to do. So when they ask you what is the axis of symmetry, right? What you need to do, you see this part of the equation here, what you're trying to square, you need to say x minus 4 is equal to 0. That's what you need to do, and therefore x is equal to 4, right? So the equation for the axis of symmetry, so the answer for part 1 is x is equal to 4. Alright, that's the answer for this part. X is equal to 4. Alright, then for part 2 now, question 2. What are the coordinates of the minimum point? Alright, so I saw somebody put a value already here, 4 minus 2. So the key thing to remember here is when you rewrite a quadratic in this format, a into x plus h squared plus k, I can do a lot when the equation is written in this format. I can easily tell what my axis of symmetry is. I can also tell what my minimum point is, and I can also sketch that curve. So the question is, what are the coordinates of the minimum point? Alright, so I've seen 4 minus 2. That's something about right. So remember, when you have a quadratic, right, we use this to find the x coordinate of the so what we do, we use this here is my axis of symmetry, right? So this is my axis of symmetry. Right? At your minimum point, so my minimum point, right, the x value will always be whatever the axis of symmetry is, which is 4. And this value here, this minus 2, is the y coordinate of my minimum point. So this is 4 minus 2. So my minimum point is actually 4 minus 2. So that's the answer for question 2, right? Also, if we write an equation, a quadratic in this format, I can easily sketch the curve. So what we do, right? I don't know what the roots are, so I'm not sure exactly where it's going to cut. So right, so I know what my minimum point is. My minimum point is 4 minus 2. So therefore, it's going to be something like this. Right, this is a quick sketch. So my curve is going to look something like this. This is going to be y, and this is going to be x, right? And this point here, this line here is going to be x equal to 4. And this point here is going to correspond to minus 2. So therefore, this point here is 4 minus 2. So this is an exam question they can ask you, right? To sketch the curve. This is what it's going to look like. So the answer for question 3 is this curve, right? And then the last part, they want us to solve the equation. So I'm missing out something here. This is equal to 0. Right? So the question wants us to solve x minus 4 squared minus 2 is equal to 0, right? So this is just another way we can solve a quadratic. You can solve a quadratic by factorizing. That's one method. You can draw the graph. So all the questions we did before, we were solving by using the graph. Or we can use this method here, which is completing the square, right? So what we do, so we have x minus 4 squared. We carry the minus 2 on the side, it becomes plus 2. Next step is to find the square root on both sides. So x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2, right? So therefore x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2 plus 4. And remember, when we solve the quadratic, we have two possibilities here. So either, first one is x is equal to plus square root of 2 plus 4, or we have x is equal to minus the square root of 2 plus 4. So you're going to use your calculator in this scenario here. So the square root of 2 is 1.41 plus 4. So in this case here, I'm getting 5.41. So this is one solution. And the next one is second function, just 2. And the next one here, we're going to get 2.59. All right. So just like before, when you had to solve the quadratic, we found two values of x when the graph, when we had drawn it on the graph. In this particular scenario here, we are using completing the square in order to solve this. All right. Let me give you one more before we wrap up. Alright, so we have a next question here. I just want the answers for for question 1. State the equation for the axis of symmetry. Alright, so I'm seeing people saying x equal 1. So what you really need to do, you need to, this part of the equation here, so you need to put x minus 1 equal to 0. So therefore x is equal to 1. So the answer for the first part is x equal to 1. Right? I want the answer for question 2. State the coordinates of the minimum point. All right, so I've seen Sharice and Danica saying 1 and minus 3. So remember, we need to look at this number here. So we already know what the axis of symmetry is. So that's 1, and so the coordinates of the minimum point will be 1 minus 3. What about the third part? State the minimum value of the function f of x. Alright, so essentially saying minus 3. So your minimum value of the function is always whatever this value is here, right? Remember, once an equation is written in this format, a into, once it's written in a into format x plus h squared plus k, we can figure out certain things from it, right? So the minimum value of f of x, the answer is just minus 3. That's it. Minus 3. Now when you want to sketch a graph, right, we're going to do this. Right, and our minimum value, our minimum point is 1 minus 3, right? So 1 minus 3 is somewhere here, right? Now we're just sketching, huh? It doesn't have to be accurate. We're not drawing a graph, we're sketching a graph. So this is y, this is x, this is my axis of symmetry, and my axis of symmetry is x equal 1. This point here is minus 3, so therefore this point here is 1 minus 3. So this is what the graph looks like. Remember, when you are sketching a graph, we need to look at what a is. If a is positive, the graph has a minimum point. If a is negative, the graph has a maximum point. So this is how we sketch a graph. And then the last part now, where you want to solve f of x equal to 0. So f of x is equal to 0. This is f of x. F of x is 2 multiplied by x minus 1 squared minus 3 is equal to 0. So you're going to have 2 x minus 1 squared is equal to 3. So therefore x minus 1 squared is equal to 3 over 2. Find the square root on both sides, so we get x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3 over 2. Therefore x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3 over 2 plus 1, right? So then we can say either x is equal to plus square root of 3 over 2 plus 1, or we can say that x is equal to minus the square root of 3 over 2 plus 1. At this stage, you can use a calculator to work this out, right? So the square root of 3 over 2, 1.22 plus 1. So in this case here, this answer is 2.22. And on this side, square root of 1.5. And you're going to get minus 0.22, right? So you all could do the question and double check your answer with what I have here. All right, so that's it for our review on quadratic functions, right? Next week I'll probably just do a quick review on functions because we've covered everything that we need to do in functions already, right? So for those of you who are not part of the class, you can just please hit subscribe on the YouTube channel, right? And I may do another video this evening, right? This is specifically for those writing the exam in July, right? Oddly enough, the video that I'm going to do is related to functions, right? It's basically similar questions to what you would get on functions in the multiple choice exam, all right? So if you subscribe, then you will automatically see when I'm going live. All right, so I hope you all had a productive class, and I will see you all next week. All right, so please have a safe week. Take care.